Okay, hello and welcome everyone. This is a webinar brought to you by Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring, which is all about unlocking potential and maximising performance for secondary school students with Cambridge CEM Insights. Just before we get started with the presentation, we just have a few housekeeping notes to run through. To ensure good sound quality, all members of the audience are muted. If you would like to ask a question, please post them in the questions section located on the right-hand side of your screen. We will answer all questions, or as many as we can, at the end of the webinar. You will receive a certificate of attendance sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes. You will receive a copy of the webinar recording sent via email next week. Thank you. I'll now hand over to our presenter, Suzanne Crocker, and enjoy this webinar.
Hello everyone, my name is Suzanne Crocker and I am an action researcher and my title is Assessment Products Integration Manager. So I'm currently working on a project with Cambridge CEM and also Cambridge International Schools on creating effective data cultures. Prior to joining Cambridge Assessment, I was a modern foreign languages teacher, worked as a head of department, and also I have had leadership roles working on data and intervention strands of a whole school transformation project and smaller projects in various other UK state schools. Thank you. Before we start with the webinar overview, I just want to say thank you to fellow Cambridge and Cambridge CEM colleagues, especially Dr. Renka Suto and the research division, for their work on predictive validity and the Cambridge Learner Profile Framework. Excuse me. There is more in-depth information available from CEM and from Cambridge. I'm just going to touch on these topics and focus on the what next question after gathering data and insights. So I'm going to talk about how to implement MidYis and MidYis baseline tests to accurately predict how students are likely to perform at Cambridge IGCSE and O-level, MidYis to support transition from primary to lower secondary, and to help inform subject choices in stage 9 or whenever your IGCSE courses start. To look at MidYis to get objective insights and set goals for students ahead of exams and monitor their progress. I'm just going to touch on that because we haven't got a lot of time today. How you might use the reports to visualize progress for students and parents, how to use the different reports available to look at future trends and compared to historic data in order to adapt and optimize teaching plans. Thank you. Okay, just a reminder to us all, these are the Cambridge CEM baseline tests, and they cover the range from primary through to post-16. The two areas I'm going to be looking at specifically today are age 11 to 14, which is MidYis, and age 14 to 16, which is MidYis. And as you can see, some of the same topics or areas are tested, but there are some differences according to the information that is particularly pertinent at that age. Thank you. And I just want to start off by saying what are baseline and diagnostic tests used for. I've used both baseline and diagnostic there because depending on the area of the world you're in, they use that this name for CEM tests interchangeably. The 4 areas: planning and focusing teaching, predictions and target setting, identifying underperforming and overperforming students, and evaluating teaching strategies. And I'm going to try and keep to those 4 strands, even though they are integrated and there are links between all the 4 strands. Thank you. So, planning and focusing teaching. So from the baseline test, teachers can get an idea of the overall at which to pitch their classroom teaching. They can compare the relative ability of a class this year compared to a last year's class or a class in the past. So they will be able to look at future performance, look at their broad strengths and weaknesses, but they're also able to look at an individual student's strengths and weaknesses. Are there students that will need lots of help and support? Some students may have a specific learning need, which might need further intervention or assessment. I have to state right now that Cambridge CEM baseline tests do not identify specific learning needs. They just might hint that there is more investigation required. And also, let's not forget the other end of the scale, who are the most able students who might need extension work and harder challenges. So we can use the reports to design and adapt the curricula and the schemes of work and make decisions about where to focus. Obviously, limited resources, perhaps by doing grouping and streaming. Thank you. So here is an example from MidYis for a stage 7 or a year 7 group, where the school has been doing Cambridge CEM MidYis tests for quite a few years, and we can compare the profile of cohorts over the years. So for example, if we were in 2019, we would have a look and we would look at this cohort, which has been divided into 4, so 25% area, and say, actually, the least able students, quite big. And then we would like to go back through the years and perhaps look at either 2017 or 2015, where actually Band D cohort was also quite large, and have a look at how we amended the curriculum and the scheme of work, how we planned with resources, what we did then, and then we would be able to say, did it work or not, and perhaps repeat what we'd done before. Thank you. So if support and interventions worked in the past, then we could reuse them. So here's an example from colleagues from Cambridge University Press. And I've been working on my action project, research project in Southeast Asia specifically because of the high percentage of students who have English as an additional language. And I was looking at this, so I knew that EL students in maths may benefit from glossaries and diagrams, consistent vocabulary, especially when introducing new concepts. So for example, they might like to have a glossary at the beginning of a topic in English. I'm assuming that we're teaching the Cambridge curriculum or an international curriculum in English, which could be translated into the student's home language to help them understand. And then focusing as a teacher on their mathematical practices rather than inaccuracies in their English when they're describing their methods. So if this worked before, if we think back to the previous cohorts, we might employ this again. If we had identified that the Band D had a barrier to learning, which was possibly English as an additional language. Thank you. So here's another type of report where we could consider a group's strengths and weaknesses. And this is again for MidYis. So we've got vocabulary, maths, non-verbal score, and skills. And 100 being average. And we can have a look at whether there are any outliers. So we would, if we had an outlier, we might do some more testing to see why there are outliers. We've got the blue bar, which are the individual scores showing the range from the bottom to the top. And we would look at this, and here is the national average. That's the UK national average. And then we could consider a year group as a whole. Thank you. Then we could drill down and use a different report to look at individual students' strengths and weaknesses. So this is some test data that we have, and we can either have it in a tabular form, which you can see at the top, or we can have it in a graph form. And sometimes it's a good idea to have a visualization, because then you can start to see some patterns. So for example, Stephen, live test 7, has above average for vocabulary and maths, but non-verbal is just above average and the skills a little bit higher than that. So we might delve into a bit more about non-verbal skills if that was relevant to our particular subject or our particular area and responsibility. Thank you. So we can use Cambridge CEM baseline data for predictions and target setting. So we could use it for discussions with students, so learning conversations. We could use it to talking to parents about progress, and we could also use it at the end of lower secondary in order to talk about subject choices. And it's very important here when we talk about making subject choices to consider the students' long-term career goals. Sometimes there are differences in opinion between the parents and the students, so it should be used very diplomatically and tactfully. Thank you. So these are some of the new reports that Cambridge CEM have, and this particular one is for individual student subject chances. And we've got arrows here showing in blue, showing each of the different GCSE subjects, and we can have it in 9 to 1, which is the UK measure. We can look at the most likely percentage. Sorry, I'll stop there. The most likely grade that a student would get. Now, this is based on information of other students who had a similar profile, who have taken their IGCSEs or their GCSEs, and then you can see the most typical progress those students have made. However, these are not forecasts, these are predictions. So if we have a look at art and design, we can see that the orange arrow shows the most likely outcome is a grade 4. However, students with this profile have gone as far as getting a grade 8, 2%, right the way down to a U, 2%. So as a teacher or as a senior leader, I'd be looking at this and talking about motivational conversations with the pupils, talking about what we could do to support that pupil to achieve the minimum potential and perhaps have a challenge as well. But of course, if you're an international school, you don't use 9 to 1. So next slide, please. We also have the possibility of looking at the chances graphs, and this is from MidYis rather than MidYis, which was a previous one. We can also look at these chances graphs A star to G, and it works in exactly the same way with the grades, and you can choose the subjects. So it could be the subjects that your particular student is studying, for example with MidYis, and you can remove it in the background. Or you could talk about this in the context of making subject choices for IGCSE, and you could show all the subjects that Cambridge CEM has got data for, that it feels that it can make an accurate prediction for. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've got lots of data, lots of insights, and when you come to analyze them, it helps to look at what makes educational success and to look at the learner holistically. And this is a framework for visualizing the 5 areas of teacher insight that academic research done by Dr. Suto has shown to be the biggest influences on educational success. There are many interactions between the areas of insight, and almost all assessments, evaluations, and teaching resources can be understood in the terms of these 5 areas. I found this particularly helpful because when I was working on data and interventions, we had a tendency to focus on the green area, which was domain knowledge, curriculum coverage. But not all gaps in knowledge, not all weaknesses, not all barriers to learning will exist in that particular area. So I'm just going to touch on the 5 areas really, really quickly. We've got cognitive skills and capabilities, which tend to be stable over time and are not taught or easily taught in schools. We've got cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding, which are things like, can I access the curriculum? Can I speak enough English to access the curriculum? Domain knowledge, that's subject knowledge. The teaching and learning environment, this is about cognitive load theory, which there is more information a bit later, where are there any distractions to the students learning in the classroom? And finally, personal attributes, sometimes called the 21st century skills. We have some that we have chosen in Cambridge learner attributes. So it could be called the student's readiness to learn. As I say, next slide, please. There's far more in-depth information in this quick guide for teachers on this website. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to use those 5 areas of insight and bring the data together and to show you how to use the data for your next actions. But I wanted to say really, really quickly a little bit about predictive validity and why is predictive validity so high when using Chem baseline tests. So if you have a look at the red area, that was in our one of our areas of insight, cognitive skills and capabilities. They measure educative ability, that's the capacity to forge new knowledge, discern meaning in confusion, perceive and identify relationships. Close relative of Bloom's analytical thinking. And then if we look at the yellow area, the cross-curricular KSU, knowledge, skills and understanding, include core mathematical concepts and language comprehension. So these 2 areas are both required to feed into the green area, which was curriculum coverage. They need in a range of secondary school subjects as it's a precursor to curriculum coverage. Again, if you want more information about the deeper information about the research, we can provide that for you after the webinar. Okay, next slide, please. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so the third area we were going to look at, or third use of baseline tests, bearing in mind now we've got these areas of insight, is identifying underperforming and overperforming students. So not only can teachers use the baseline information, for example, along the x-axis, we've got in yellow the cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding from the Cambridge CEM baseline, which is the vocabulary score. But we can also compare it to any internal or external assessments that the school might have. So along the y-axis, we've got in green, the science exam, so that's curriculum coverage. And then we can spot students who are underperforming and not yet meeting their potential, recognise when students are on track, identify praise and learn from students who are overperforming. And I would like to put in here, make sure that they don't burn out and they don't put too much pressure on themselves. Okay, thank you. I think, yes. The fourth use for baseline tests are evaluating teaching strategies. So if you compare your baseline test results at the beginning of a key stage or beginning of a year, and then work forward and you compare to your examination grades at IGCSE, AS and A level, it can help teachers understand what worked well in the classroom. And there is a measure called value added. And from that, you can extrapolate which teaching strategies led students to overperform and exceed expectations, which strategies were less successful. And therefore, you can really focus your resources and your attention to the successful teaching strategies quicker and repeat your success again and again. Thank you. So here is an example of a school value added report that has come from Cambridge CEM Baseline. And so again, to remind you, you need to have the baseline data, but you also need to have sent in the IGCSE results in this particular. In fact, I tell a lie. It is a GCSE results because it's 9-1, and therefore you can then get this information from the reports from your Cambridge CEM dashboard. So in this particular view, you can see which departments have been adding the most value and which ones have perhaps not been adding so much value. It is not taken as a judgment tool, but to start asking questions. For example, English department and the English literature department in this particular school have a positive standardized residual. So you could start asking questions of that department. What strategies did you use? What resources did you use? If you have a look at biology and chemistry and physics, they have a negative standardized residual. So you could look at what could be done to support those subjects in that department, whether there are any patterns, whether there are any training needs, whether there are any resource needs there to support that the teaching and learning and the teachers there in order to improve their value added. It's important to remember that students or learners don't start on a level playing field, nor do they end at the same point. It's important to identify their potential to help each individual to maximize their potential. And school value added can really, really help on different levels. You can look at school level, year group level, female, male, so you can look at different groups within your school in order to really pinpoint areas that need support, resources, and then again to start identifying exactly what their needs are. Thank you. Okay, so we've been talking about teaching and learning, and looking at this, we've got hold of the curriculum. This is a maths curriculum. We've got hold of the learning plan, sometimes called a scheme of work. So if you think of the curriculum and the scheme of work as being what you would deliver in an average year, so the middle, if you like, you would need to adapt it each year according to the needs of your learners in that particular cohort, in that particular class, or of the individual within that class. So we've got learning objectives, so the teacher knows what to teach. but you can't have outstanding teaching without outstanding learning. So you need some, on the right-hand side, some success criteria so the teacher can measure what the class has learned. Back to our cohort graph, we put in some extra support for less able students because we had a very large band D, and also amongst that band D, we had quite a lot of EAL learners. So a few years back, we put in some extra language support. Well, we're going to be able to use that again if that is part of the requirement of our learners in this particular cohort. Thank you. Could we move forward, please? Okay. Are we on the right slide? I'm getting a bit confused. Okay, we are on the right side. Well, no. Okay, no, go backwards, please. And again. And right. So so and forwards. It's next one. And right. Just a little note about different types of assessment. When you are evaluating progress, whether it is during a lesson, during a topic, at the end of a topic, at the end of a key stage, it's worth thinking about different types of assessment and the different types of data and insight that you get, all of which is important. So we're dividing up into formative and summative assessment. So looking at summative assessment very quickly, that is at the end of a lesson or an end of a topic or the IGCSE exam grades. It could, though, be informal or formal. It could be essays, it could be coursework, it could be tests, it could be exams. But most importantly, when you are monitoring progress, you need to have formative assessment. You need to be able to say where the learner is now and what they need to do next to improve. And we've got informal techniques such as questioning, feedback, peer assessment, self-assessment, but we've also got the formal type of formative assessment, such as further analysis or tests, exams and essays. So rather than just saying you have 70% in your exam, you would say, okay, you've done really well on identifying quadrilaterals. Now you need to focus on being able to estimate angles. I'm making that up as I go along. So, and then you use the to improve on as target setting. And that is particularly important in the lead up to IGCSE and GCSE exams, where your students are revising and focusing on exam technique in order to perform the best they possibly can in their exams. Next slide, please. Okay, so you're gathering all of this data. You've got numbers, you've got different scores, different levels. I've talked about percentages. I've talked about 9 to 1 if you're in the UK. I've talked about A star to G if you are international. I've talked about baseline tests where the average score is 100 and the maximum you can get is 145 to 150. I'm going to talk about checkpoint, which Cambridge checkpoint scores, which are in grade 6 and grade 9 following the Cambridge curriculum. They have a scale from 0.00 to 6.00. You are looking at all different kinds of scales in your quantitative data, so it's really important to understand what the minimum and maximum is for each particular area of insight and data, and what it means. So for example, I know that on MidYis baseline tests, the average score is 100. I know that on the checkpoint score, the maximum score is a 6. I think if you get a 5, you are on track to get a C. So it's important to understand what the scores mean, whether it's above average, average, below average. But I also would like to talk about qualitative data, information from surveys and discussions. It can be more opinion-based, but I still think it's very relevant in gathering insights about your learners and giving a snapshot at that point when the questions are asked, and it can be equally as powerful as the quantitative data. Thank you. And I know that many teachers within schools find it very challenging to look at lots and lots of different qualitative data. So I'm putting forward that at least if you're starting out, the most simple scale is to RAG rate it. So if you can agree a different definition for each colour, red, amber, green, you can train your staff on how to measure for each category. And you can say, if you've got a red or if you've got 3 reds or whatever it is that you want to say, that's an underperforming student and you need to put in some actions in order to support that student. It's a very easy visual way to see any underperformance. Thank you. So I'm going to do a case study, and this one is on transition from primary to lower secondary. So going into grade 7. The senior leaders can use information to allocate their resources most effectively. Heads of department can adjust their curriculum schemes of work according to the actual needs of their cohorts. Classroom teachers can differentiate their teaching plans to make sure that every student in their class can achieve their potential. And individual students' needs can be identified quickly and objectively, and support can be given to those that need it. Thank you. So, first of all, I've got my framework and I'm mapping information that I might get from the learners' primary schools. So at the moment, I've got in the domain knowledge, I've got end of year grades from primary schools. In the teaching and learning environments, I've got attendance records. And in the personal attributes, I've got reports of motivation and engagement, and also any reports on extracurricular achievements and awards. Thank you. Right, so I might have some Cambridge assessments that I could fit into this framework. So I've got MidYis, which covers cognitive skills and capabilities, as well as cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding. I might do some kind of English benchmarking test. There is a Cambridge English benchmarking test that I could look at. And then I might have some qualitative data from the subject teachers' early conversations with the learners in their class. Oh, and I might, on the personal attributes area of insight, do a Cambridge wellbeing check. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to look at this from the math teacher's focus. So as you can see, we've got lots and lots of different areas of insight, lots and lots of data and information. But as a maths teacher, I'm interested in prior domain knowledge and maths potential. So I'm going to be focusing on the MidYis Chem baseline data, subject teachers' early conversations with learners, and end of year grades from primary schools. So we've got some data from another source, which is the primary schools. You don't know what the criteria has been for those end of year grades. You do not know if they've been inflated, and I've come across grade inflation before, but also then it might be incomplete. And possibly most importantly, it's going to be 8 to 12 weeks old and could be out of date. So I'm going to use that as my secondary data to see whether I've got historic trends or not. And I'm going to then look at my MidYis baseline data, which will be objective and up to date. And I'm going to look at my notes from my conversations with learners. And I might have agreed with my department that we would ask the same questions of our grade 7 learners in our classes, and then we might ask some personalized questions. Okay, thank you. And as a way of creating a holistic view, I might set out my data like this. So as you can see at the top, I've got the different areas of insight in different colors, and the final column in Cambridge blue, of course, would be the educational success, the outcomes. So having a look at this, I've got learner 1 to 5. I've got their MidYis nonverbal reasoning. I have got under their KSU, cross-curricular knowledge, I've got their maths and their vocab. Then I've got some notes on my conversations with the learners in my class. And I'm imagining that the primary schools have followed Cambridge Checkpoint for maths, and I've got stage 6 grades. Okay, so if we have a look at learner 1, I've rag rated it for us. We've got green, we've got overachieving. Why do we think they're overachieving? Well, if we think that 100 is average, if we look at the red and the yellow areas, we can see that they are just above average. We can see that they have got 5.5 out of 6 for checkpoint stage 6, which is a very good score. I hasten to add at this moment that checkpoint stage 6 grades, these are external assessments marked by Cambridge. So actually, I can think that that data is fairly reliable. But looking at the conversation, my qualitative data loves maths, does extra at home. So a highly motivated learner. Okay, then I'm looking at learner 2. So they are just below average for their MidYis. They enjoy maths, but find shapes difficult and got a 4.8 at checkpoint. So they're achieving, but already there, I have got a gap in learning. Find shapes difficult. So what I might do is a transition series of lessons. And if I found a cohort that found shapes difficult, then I might do a revision of shapes. Learners 3, 4, and 5 are all underachieving, but for different reasons. So learner 3, so well above average for nonverbal reasoning, above average for maths, average for vocabulary. Finds maths okay, but doesn't like school at all. I get 3.7, which is very low. If you compare that to learner 1, you can see that's a very low score indeed. And I would be picking up on doesn't like school at all and perhaps passing that on to the pastoral team to ask more questions and find out if there is a barrier to learning there where more support is needed. Learner 4 is above average for nonverbal reasoning and maths, but is only average for vocabulary. And the notes are, tries really hard and gets frustrated when does not understand a discussion. So I've got a clue there that the vocabulary and understanding of the conversations in class could be a barrier to learning. Now that could be somebody with limited vocabulary, or it could be a learner that has English as an additional language. And they got 3.5 in their checkpoint stage 6. Learner 5 have extremely high scores for their MidYis, but jumping forward to the checkpoint stage 6 grades, only got a 4.5. So there's something wrong there. And in the conversation with the learner, I can see does not like maths, it's too hard. Well, considering that this learner's ability is so high, especially in maths, it's too hard there's more to unpick there and ask questions about. So I'm going to focus on learner 4 and 5 because I've got questions that need more data in order to find out whether there's a gap in learning, whether there's a barrier to learning, and what I could do as a maths teacher to make sure that learner 4 and learner 5 achieve. Next slide, please. Okay, on learner 4, I'm looking here at an underperforming student, and I'm going to look at the individual student record for MidYis for learner 4. And I can see vocab on the average line, and the other 3 scores, mathematics, non-verbal, and skills, above average. So I can see that vocabulary is a bit of an outlier, but not horrendously so. So again, I would be asking, is this a learner with limited vocabulary that we need to improve their vocabulary, or is this an EAL learner? And some of the interventions for both barriers to learning are the same. However, there are some specific EAL interventions which will not work for a learner with limited vocabulary. Thank you. Learner 5, we can see that this individual student record is far more in line. So we don't think the barrier to learning is to do with their cognitive ability. So we might then look at the different areas in the holistic framework, perhaps in personal attributes and readiness to learn, or perhaps in teaching and learning environment, which could also include home environment. And perhaps we would look there with a pastoral team in order to make sure that this learner was in the best place possible to achieve their potential. Thank you. So we know that learner 4 and learner 5 are underperforming. If we have a look at their chances graphs for achieving at IGCSE, their predicted target grades, we can see that learner 4 is most likely to be getting a B. Now, I appreciate this is 5 years off, but it gives us an idea of what they could achieve. So I would go for this learner to say A stroke B. Learner 5 is predominantly A star with 80%, but 16% A. So I would say A stroke A star for learner 5. Next slide, please. So if we go back to our dashboard, we might take the checkpoint grade 6 exams as a starting point if we didn't have the baseline data. And if we took that data and we projected forward, we might put together some target grades at IGCSE, or we might put forward some stage 7 targets per term to track progress. And as we could see for learner 4 and learner 5, in red, if we took the grade 6 checkpoint scores, we would be tracking forward to looking for IGCSE target grades, possibly of a C for both learner 4 and learner 5. But if we look at the chances graphs, we see that learner 4 is capable of an A stroke B and learner 5 is capable of an A stroke A star. So we got a difference there, and these learners are not going to be able to reach those higher grades that the chances graphs show that they are capable of getting unless there's some kind of intervention. Thank you. Another area that is useful, another report from MidYis and from MidYis, is a report for talking to parents. And I know it's very small, but it talks about what a MidYis test is here. This is an example from MidYis, sorry. And it's got some information about vocabulary and explains how the different sections of the baseline test indicate later academic achievement. There's a section for maths. But there's also development targets here, which can be discussed with school and supported at home. And I think you have to be careful about what data you share with parents. And what I like about this is that it's easily accessible language. It explains why the MidYis tests in the different areas are useful and how it can be used to indicate later academic achievement. But also, they're easily accessible and measurable development targets which parents can support at home and the school can check on progress easily. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've shown you one way of presenting the data, and that's all very well and good, but I think I thought I would like to show you this actual real life example from the Cairo English School. Okay, so all I have done at the basic level is created a spreadsheet for each of the students. So how to integrate Cambridge CEM with other assessments. And you have a look here for each of these particular students. So this is a student per page. We've got their subjects. We've got the Cambridge CEM result. We've got a target grade. And then we've got curriculum-based tests. So we have got attainment, what they got in the exam, and we can measure progress as we go along. And then, if you remember, the personal attributes are the readiness to learn. They've actually put some of this in under effort, and they've written a definition somewhere of what A, B, C on effort actually means. So they are looking at scores of 9 to 1 with the academic side of it, and then they're looking at A, B, C on effort, and you can you have assessment point 1, 2, 3. You can label it however you like. And then what they have done is they have done the RAG rating. So they are tracking students against the Cambridge CEM target, and they've got an easy way for anybody to come along and to identify students not meeting their potential. And it's also a clear way of indicating to parents very quickly whether their child is on track according to each particular subject. Okay, thank you. Right, so I've talked very quickly. I hope that gives you some ideas about maximising potential or unlocking potential for MidYis and for YELLIS. And I think we've got about 12 minutes left for questions.
Great, thank you, Suzanne, for that informative and interesting presentation. Like you say, we've got some time for questions. If you have a question, please put it in the question box on the right hand of your screen. I'll just have a look and see if we've got any coming in. So we have a question here that is, what are portfolios in summative assessments?
A portfolio is a portfolio of evidence. So if you've got summative assessment, let me give you an example. IGCSE literature in Spanish, I suppose you would call it coursework, but it is a portfolio of numerous pieces of work, and it will have an assessment objective stated for each item of work in that portfolio. Another good example is DT in art and design, where the students get a brief and they have to produce evidence of various different assessment objectives, such as development of an idea. That's all it is, really.
Great, thank you. Another question we've had in is, does YELLIS work in a similar way, so more or less like MidYis?
Yes, it does. I think if we remember back to the second slide, MidYis tests slightly different areas, but it does do vocabulary and maths, and it still fits in within the two areas of insights, the yellow and the red. So it measures capability, and it measures the cross-curricular knowledge, skills, and understanding needed to access the curriculum.
Thank you. We've had a few questions through as well, asking if the recording will be available. So just a reminder, we will be sending the recording out in the following week. We've had another question about how to use data or grades, I should say, from primary schools.
It depends on what curriculum the primary schools have followed. In my experience, you will get incomplete data, because when you've got transition from one school to another, you will have some data from some primary schools, but also you might have some incomers coming into the country. I would use it as secondary evidence unless it's an external standardized exam, such as Cambridge Checkpoint. I would gather my data for now, if you like, the baseline point. So I might do a Cambridge Chem test. I might do a Cambridge placement test, or whatever test it is. I might do the entrance test. I would have some data from my conversations with the learner, and if I had some questions or something that it's a bit like having a hypothesis in science. You start asking questions, and then you could look at your primary school data to see if you could find some of the answers. I mean, don't get me wrong, the data could be very, very good, but you don't know. And it's also from primary school, it's the end of the previous year. It could be a bit out of date, because we know how fast learners develop. So as I said, I would use my primary data, my fresh new data, my objective data, and then I'd compare it to my secondary data, or secondary importance, my primary information, just to see if I could spot any patterns.
Oh, great, thanks, Suzanne. We've had another question here about if the data seems complicated or in-depth, what help and support is there available for teachers and coordinators through CEM? Are there any training courses?
I believe that there are courses and workshops available. There is a professional development on offer. I don't know exactly what topics are on offer at the moment, so perhaps you could mention that in a minute. But I was going to say there are some quick teacher guides that might be able to help you on the chem.org positive learning website. What else have we got, Cora?
Yeah, there's lots of resources available. So we have the professional development course, as you mentioned, which covers a range of topics and gives in-depth support. We can include a link to that in our follow-up email. We also have lots of new additions to the Teacher Help Centre. So there's guides and quick guides there, and reference videos to help support with understanding and interpreting data. We have another question here that is, what is the best way to deal with parents of underachievers, and how can we make them appreciate the learner's ability to help them improve?
That is a difficult question.
Tricky one.
Okay, I will attempt to. I think I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Golden Triangle, where educational success comes from the parent, the student, and the school working together. So if one part of that triangle isn't supporting, then it's very, very difficult. Trying to include the parents in the learning conversations, making it accessible to them, using these reports that I showed where we've got development goals, motivating the parents, so actually sending home letters of praise when the student has done something, you know, good, because a lot of parents, especially of underachieving students, get a lot of negative correspondence from the school. Failing that, I think the school to a certain extent is going to need to support that student a little bit more, and I've done quite a lot of different mentoring schemes, not where the mentor replaces the parents, but takes on a partial role in supporting that student at school in their academic progress. I'm choosing my words very carefully there, so that there is support for that student. They know that they can come and ask questions or feedback about what's going on for them at school. It is a delicate and difficult topic. I don't think there is any right answer. You just have to keep trying to motivate and engage parents. You have to perhaps support the parent and support the student.
Thanks, Suzanne. I think we've got time for one more question. So we've got one here is, how often do we do formative assessments and summative assessments?
Depends on your context. Any teacher is actually doing formative assessment right the way through their lesson, from when they say, have you understood what the instructions are? Do you understand what the learning objectives are? Asking questions, giving feedback, doing a plenary at the end of the lesson. Those are all kind of informal formative assessment. But I think the important thing is to remember that you need to do something with that formative assessment. You need to take action if there are any gaps in understanding or learning. With regard to summative assessment, when you get to the end of a topic, you need to be, when you do summative assessment, it's at the end of something, whether it's a topic or perhaps a term. Quite often schools like to report on a termly basis, or obviously when it is an exam. But I think the important thing, as I said before, when you get to IGCSE and your student gets a grade, then it's too late to help them to make progress. It's too late to help them fulfill their potential. I also have to say, when you are doing more formal formative assessment, you have to be giving the student some time to assimilate the information skills from the curriculum. So you can't do more formal assessments too often. And I have found maybe 8 to 12 weeks is probably a good reporting time. And it doesn't have to be a test. It could be something else. It could be a class discussion where you observe. But as I say, teachers do formative assessment informally all the time. A formal formative assessment or a formal summative assessment, you actually need some time for the student to take on board whatever's being taught in that particular topic.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. I believe that's all we've got time for today. So thank you again to our presenter, Suzanne Crocker, for your presentation and answering our questions. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If you found this webinar interesting and you'd like to have a deeper conversation about how CEM can support your school, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can contact us at cem@cambridge.org. All our contact information is on our website. We will be holding more webinars in the coming weeks and months, taking an in-depth look at each of our assessment products, as well as regionally focused webinars that delve into why international schools choose CEM. So look out for emails with more details coming soon. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.